If you go ahead and turn your Bibles back to Acts chapter 17, we'll be going there in just a second. But first, I hope you notice the bulletin. It's kind of full, isn't it? I like it. I like it when it's full. I like it when it's colorful, and we've got a lot of stuff to put in there. And this time we even had to put an insert for the outline. I hope you can use that. I hope you're able to use that this morning to take notes, to follow along. And as we notice on the front part of the bulletin, well, we've got some news here about two young ladies, Haley Tucker and Shelby Clemens. Haley has been visiting with us for some time and comes to us from East. Where is she? There she is. You embarrassed? Yeah, you're really fixing to be. Would you come up? No, I'm not going to ask you to come up here. If you don't mind, would you stand up and just let everybody see who you are and turn around? There's Haley. Yeah, and we have Shelby. She's kind of bearing her face. Shelby was baptized Wednesday night. Eddie and Alicia had a study with her, and she was baptized about 10 o'clock, wasn't it? About 10 o'clock last night. She's a new Christian, so we welcome her. And I'm going to ask you to stand too. Can you just peek your head up and just turn? There she is. There she is. So we want to let everybody know who they are. We put their picture in the bulletin and got all their information. You add that to your directory and some the things that send them a little note. Let them know you appreciate them. Let them know you're thankful that they become part of our family. And that's what they are. They're family to us now. And as we treat family, we treat them with love, we treat them with respect, but most importantly in the church, we take family, we use them. So let's put them to work. Let's all get busy and help them find their role and find their ministry and some things that they can do as we seek to continue to grow. Good things are happening. Great things are happening. And just make sure you take note of those things and as we continue to grow. As we look at Acts chapter 17, I want you to just hold that thought there for just a moment, because I want to share with you an article I read not long ago out of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. There was a professor, Russell Moore. He was the dean of theology, and he had a blog, or a blog that he was writing, and the blog was titled, "The Devil is a Boring Preacher." And that struck me. If you'll go on to that next slide, Derek, and that kind of struck me when I thought of the devil a boring preacher, because that's really not what I thought about. I thought that, I thought the devil kind of preaches excitement and get involved in things and different things. But make no mistake, the devil is a preacher. He does preach. And the message that he preaches for a period of time is excitement. But it grows very cold very quickly, and it has nothing to really latch onto. That's what the article is about, that as the devil preaches, he might preach an exciting thought for you about getting involved in this because it feels good, because it's exciting, but then at the same time, not long after you get involved in it, you get bored with it. And I thought about that, and I started to think about Christmas, and that thought kind of hit me this morning about Christmas presents for kids. You know those Christmas presents that kids would get, and they would play with it for like 20 minutes, and then it was done? That was it? I mean, they were all excited to get this one present. What was it, Amazing Amanda? What was that doll you had? Amazing Amanda. What a name. Amazing Amanda. We got that for Emma one Christmas, and she had talked about it for months. It was a baby that talked, that did some other things we won't mention from the pulpit. I think that's right, wasn't it? She don't remember. You know why? Because she never played with it. It was like $100 for a doll, and we bought it. It was so excited to use, and so excited to see her open it, and then, oh, there's a box. Let's play with the box. And kids get excited about those things very quickly, but then it kind of just gets boring to them because they're used to it. It's almost if the anticipation of the gift is better than the gift itself. And that is the message that the devil preaches. It's a message that the anticipation is so great But in the long run, it really adds nothing to it. There's no real meat to latch onto. There's nothing long-lasting. There's nothing that gives you fulfillment. But on the contrary, the message of the cross is anything but boring. If you take your Bibles for just a second and mark this in Acts 17, that we're going to be there for a little while, and going over to Matthew chapter 10, and I want you to look at this passage here in Matthew chapter 10. We're going to look at two of them here, beginning in verse 34. Do not think that I've come to bring peace. This is Jesus. Don't think I came to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's hard. I mean, that's a hard message. That's not boring right there. That causes trouble. Skip on over there to the page before and look at verse 16 of Matthew 10. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you. Now, none of us have ever been flogged, but we've read about it. They'll flog you in their synagogues. You'll be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for it will be given to you. Verse 21, brother will deliver brother over to death, father his child, children will rise against their parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. You see, church, that's anything but boring, isn't it? Now, it may not be something that we're excited about. It may not be something that offers us a lot of love and warm fuzzies, but it's anything but boring. I'm here to state my case this morning that what the world needs now is not this fluff, it's not these warm and fuzzies within the church. Because what happens when we have these warm and fuzzies, all we do is stroke who we are. We just want to make ourselves feel good about things. We just want to be content, and we don't want to ruffle feathers with anybody. We don't want to upset anybody's personal beliefs. We don't want to step on anybody's toes. We don't want to get involved politically because we're afraid that might hurt feelings. And when we hurt feelings, that means we mess up our relationships. And our relationships, we are very important, and we want to be careful so as to not offend anyone. But that is not what I just read from the Scriptures, is it? That is not what I read from the Scriptures. That's not what Jesus says is going to happen. Now, he says it's going to happen to the disciples, but he implies that it's going to happen not just to them, but to the rest of us today. And even though we're not facing the persecution that they might have been facing, we're facing our own, a different type. So my case today, if you go on to the next slide, Derek, is that what the world needs now is not these warm fuzzies, but what the world needs now is some troublemakers. Now that's going to sound offensive to you, and it's going to sound a little uncomfortable at first, but I think when you read what we're going to read in Acts chapter 17, I think you're going to see what we need within the church, what we need within the brotherhood, what we need within our homes, what we need within the workplace, is we need troublemakers. Now, if I told you that person was a troublemaker, you'd mark that person. You wouldn't want to have anything to do with them because you think that person over there is somebody that causes problems. All they do is instigate situations and make things hard on everybody else. Well, that is true. But when you look at the text with me this morning, I think you'll see the direction I'm going. Acts chapter 17. Paul went in verse 2, and as was his custom, On 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned in the synagogues from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and rise from the dead, explaining, "This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ." So he's preaching in their synagogues, and he stays there for at least 3 Sabbath days, teaching them in their churches, teaching them about Jesus. These Jews, who some have had a hard time understanding or fathoming that Jesus is coming, that Jesus was there, and that he died and rose and going to come again. And the Greeks there was some Greeks there in this area, in Thessalonica, that were still struggling with that as well, and they're listening, and they're following. And it says a lot of the Greeks came, but it says a lot of their women too. Continue on. Some of them were persuaded and joined by Paul and Silas, and did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some of the wicked men from the rabble or the marketplace, they formed a mob, and they set the city in uproar. They attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. And Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying there is another king, Jesus." And the people and all the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. When they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. When you look at that phrase, "They have turned the world upside down," you'll see it in your Bibles. They have turned the world upside down. Now, have they done that? Did the disciples do that? Absolutely, they did. They went and they turned the world upside down. They took the teaching of these Greeks and flipped it over on them and told them what they were believing was wrong, and there's something different. They took the message that the Jews had, and they told them that they had been practicing it, but it now was fulfilled, and the law had been fulfilled, and it was time to move on to what Jesus had brought to them. So he turned their world upside down. No more offering sacrifices, no more Sabbath days, no more obedience to the law. They had flipped their whole mindset and just turned it upside down. And they were changing the world with their message. Now I ask you, is that a bad thing? You can nod your head yes or shake it no. Is that a bad thing what they did? No, absolutely it's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a great thing what they were doing, because they were revealing that Jesus is the Christ, and they were corrupting those people's thoughts into changing them into the truth. And that was exactly what they needed to do. But that phrase, turning the world upside down, you might want to underline it in your Bible. In the Greek, this is what it means. This is what the phrase means collectively in the Greek. Oh, this is good. I hope you're ready for this. To disrupt, to make an uproar, or to cause trouble. You see that? To turn the world upside down was to cause trouble. And I think you'd agree with me, if we sought to turn the world upside down today in the same way that they did, we'd be doing a good thing. But to do so means it's going to be a little disruption involved. It means it's going to be a little problem. Maybe problems at home. Maybe problems in the workplace. Maybe problems at school. You might get teased. You might get poked at. You might be punished at work. But for the same token, so were the disciples. And we've agreed that that troublemaking, in this case, is a good thing. So what makes up a troublemaker? How is this troublemaker that we're talking about? What does this entail? How am I supposed to be a troublemaker? How am I going to become a troublemaker to really cause this stir to turn upside down the world, my family, my workplace, my school, my friends? Well, let's look at the disciples here and look at their example. Number one is the example that they provided for us is that a troublemaker needs to be a person of integrity. A troublemaker will be a person that has integrity. And as we look at integrity, we know what it means. We know it means that they've got something, some character deep within them. Some truth about them. That means they're not hypocritical. They believe one thing, they say one thing, and they live out that same thing. That's what integrity is. Let me tell you why this is different with them. You know the Greek world. You know what the Greek world entailed. You had Nero, who was the ruler there of the Roman era. And Nero comes in walking down the streets. Maybe walking in the streets of Thessalonica, where we're reading here, with his 12-year-old lover. That's documented. Fondling his 12-year-old lover. Incest, homosexuality. All these things were involved in this world. And this is the lifestyle that these Greeks are living in. That is the political way of life. That is the natural way of life for them. That is just everyday life for them. And they have these men come in and they live differently. They have this Paul and Silas coming in and they're preaching something different. Not only are they preaching something different, they're not acting like these other people, and they take notice because these Greeks were looking for something. They were looking for something that had some depth. They were looking for something that had some texture, something that they could latch on to, especially a lot of these Greek women. And these men that came through preaching in Thessalonica became men of integrity, and people took notice of it. Church, if you live the life of a Christian, if you live what you believe, what the Word says, if you live that, people will notice. People will take notice of it. Remember, we're taught when Jesus said, a new commandment I've given to you, and the new commandment is that you love one another. Love one another. That's the new commandment. And that they'll know you're my disciples by the love that you have for one another. If we were just to live that out, people would notice who we are. People would know that we're something different, and they'd want to be convicted by it, and they'd want to join it. When we look in Acts chapter 4, verses 19 and 20, when you see the disciples, when Peter and John are arrested, do you know what the people there think about them? They say these men are unlearned. They're unlearned, they're uneducated, but it says that they took note that they had been with Jesus. They could tell that they had been with Jesus just by who they were and what they were doing. So these men of integrity, if we become people of integrity, we will become a troublemaker. Now let me read something to you. We had some technical problems this morning, so I'm having to do all these electronic devices. I'm going to read you a letter here, and this letter is from, it's written in the 2nd century, and it was written by a Greek teacher named Dionysius in the middle of the 2nd century. And he is writing to people about how revolutionary Christianity has become. Okay? He's writing about Christians to other people that are not, and explaining to them what Christians are. I'm going to read you what he said in this letter. You can look this up. Christians are indistinguishable from other men by either nationality, language, or customs. They do not inhabit separate cities of their own, or speak a strange dialect, or follow some outlandish way of life. Their teaching is not based on revelries inspired by the curiosity of men. Unlike some other people, they champion no human doctrine with regard to dress, food, manner of life in general. They follow the customs in whatever city they happen to be living in, whether it is Greek or foreign. And yet, there's something extraordinary about their lives. They live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. They play their full role as citizens, but they labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. Like others, they marry and have children, but they do not expose them. They share their meals, but not their wives. They live in the flesh, but they're not governed by the desires of the flesh. They pass their days upon earth, but they are citizens of heaven. Obedient to the laws, they yet live on a level that transcends all law. Christians love all men, but all men persecute them. Condemned because they are not understood, they're put to death but raised to life again. They live in poverty, but they enrich many. They are totally destitute, but they possess an abundance of everything. They suffer dishonor, but that is their glory. They are defamed, but vindicated. A blessing is their answer to abuse, difference, and their response to insult. For the good they do, they receive the punishment of the malefactors, but even then they rejoice as though receiving the gift of life. They're attacked by the Jews as aliens, and they are persecuted by the Greeks. Yet no one can explain the reason for this hatred. To speak in general terms, we may say that the Christian is to the world what the soul is to the body. As the soul is present in every part of the body while remaining distinct from it, so are Christians are found in all the cities of the world, but cannot be identified with the world. And as the visible body contains the invisible soul, so Christians are seen in the world, living in the world, but their religious life remains unseen. The body hates the soul and wages war against it, not because of any injury the soul has done, but because of the restrictions the soul places on its pleasures. Similarly, the world hates the Christians, not because they've done any wrong, but because they are opposed to the enjoyments. Christians love those who hate them, just as the soul loves the body and all of its members despite the body's hatred. As the soul benefits from deprivation of food and drink, so Christians flourish under persecution. Such is the Christian's lawfully and divinely appointed function, from which he is not permitted to excuse himself. Now, that was rather lengthy, yes, but you saw the point. He's not a Christian. He's writing about Christians. And he says, I look at their life, and man, their life is totally different than everybody else. I mean, they live in all these cities. They don't have a specific city where Christians live. They don't all inhabit Jerusalem. They live in every city, and they look just like everybody else. But they act different. Their lives are different. They're different in their speech. They're different in their attitude. They live by the laws of the land, but yet they know they're governed by something else. They live as sojourners in a land that's not theirs, understanding that their goal is heaven. They share their meals with one another, but they don't share their wives. They're different from the rest. And that is what the Greeks were looking for. Something that was real. Something that was different than what they had seen. And what the Lord provided for them in these disciples were men of integrity. And what they did, this caused trouble. Because they were living the life that they were supposed to live. Because it was contrary to what the world said. Church, if we begin to live lives of integrity, they'll take notice. And look on over in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. It worked. Because when the church was established there in Thessalonica, look at what happens in verse 9. They themselves report concerning us the kind of reception, Paul says, we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for His Son from heaven, whom He raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. It worked. What they did worked. And we as Christians, if we live those lives of integrity and be troublemakers, we'll do the same thing. But the second aspect here that these men had, these men were not only men that were troublemakers, but when you look at Acts 17, these men were men of intensity. Intensity. Notice what they said. Look at verse 6 and 7 again. When they could not find them, remember, they've gotten these men from the marketplace, these worthless men, these scoundrels. He's gotten these scoundrels, and he's taken them, and they've gone against those members of the church. When they could not find Paul and Silas, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers of the city authorities, shouting, "These men have turned the world upside down and have come here also." And Jason has received them. And they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying there is another King Jesus. Acting against. Here's another phrase I want us to define what it means. Acting against, defined as from in front of. That is the opposite, before or against. Contrary, over against, and here's the one, in the presence of. Now that's key here. These men are acting against the decrees of Caesar in the presence of other people. That indicates that they had some intensity. Intensity meaning the quality or state of being extreme with feeling and energy. That means they didn't hide it. They were not ashamed of it. They weren't afraid to go into public places and talk about how Jesus is king. It's not Caesar. That inscription on that coin, yes, that's what you pay your taxes to, but that's not who's king. We'd be afraid to do that. Many of us would be afraid to do that because we don't want to cause any trouble. We don't want to cause any uproar. We don't want people to look at us strange. But church, that's exactly what we need to do, is have people look at us and take notice that we're different. We are aliens here. This is not our home. Amen? I mean, is that true? Do you understand this concept? This is not our home. We don't live here. Just as Jesus came down and the Word became flesh in verse 14 of chapter 1, that means tabernacled. It means tented. It means He came and He temporarily lived here. He set up a tent. That's what we live in. No matter how big your house is, no matter how many things you got, it's a tent. It's temporary. It's only going to last for a little while, and our home is somewhere else. And we've got to live with an intensity that's where we're going to. We don't need to take shop in this life here. We don't need to put all our marbles in this basket. So we don't need to just look toward everything here is what matters when it doesn't. And when we start changing our lifestyle, changing the way we talk, changing the way we live, when people see that we're men and women of integrity, when people see that we're men and women who have an intensity about them, that we're devout in it, that's what works. There are people out there that are intense in a bunch of different things. You got your sports fans, all right? You got your sports fans. You got your people that are fans of some type of music, and they're very excited about it, and they're very animated about it, and they're intense about it. But I want to talk to you for just a minute about those people that we've all had contact. It's no disrespect to any of them. But remember those people that used to try to get us to buy stuff over the phone, these telemarketers, you know. You don't like them. You really don't like them, because they call at the most inconvenient times, and you don't want to talk, and you don't want what they're selling. Or what about these people that come door to door and they try to sell you something? You don't want it, but they try to make you feel like that you need it, don't they? They make you feel, I don't like what they're doing, but I respect it. Because you can look at them and you can say, they have some intensity about it, and they're not going to give up. They're not going to give up. If you say no the first time, they're going to try to make you feel like you need it again. And if you tell them you don't need it, they're going to come up with a way to explain to you that yes, you do need it. Maybe that's what we need to be more like. That sounds awful, doesn't it? Maybe we need to be more like a little telemarketer. We don't take no for an answer when it comes to the truth. We're going to present it. If you reject it, we're going to present it again. Now there will come a time where we shake the dust off our feet and we move on to the next person, or we move on to the next city. But by token, these men were men of intensity. They were in front of, they were in your face with it. They did this in the presence of others where it was seen. People of integrity. People of intensity. We can't fear taking the political stand. We can't fear troubling the waters. We can't fear what people are going to think of us. We can't fear of repercussions about what might happen. Remember, the message of the cross brings trouble. It sets mother against father. It sets kids against their parents. It sets employees against their bosses. It sets students against their teachers. It divides. But it's truth. Troublemakers. They have integrity. They have intensity. Thirdly, these troublemakers will be involved. When you look at you know, troublemakers, the wrong kind, always try to find their way in the middle of things that they don't really need to be in. That's the wrong kind of troublemaker. But the right kind of troublemaker needs to be involved. When you look at these men, Paul and Silas are gone. But what did they do? They went to Jason's house. And they drug him out. I don't know the visual you get in your mind, but when I get dragged, that word dragged into my thoughts, I think of someone being dragged by the hair of the head or by their clothes on the ground, not being able to withstand, but trying to, being carried off. Jason and these other disciples, these other Christians, they were willing to get involved. When these people come, when these troublemakers come, it would have been very easy for Jason to say, they went that away. You know, they went that away. Well, they were here for a little while and, you know, they did cause the trouble, but that's where they went. But instead, I'm sure when those troublemakers got there, they said, are you with them? Are you with this Paul and Silas? Are you following their teaching? And they said, absolutely. And they were willing to suffer the punishment. They were willing to suffer the persecution. They were willing to go through it. Why? Because they were integrity. They were people of integrity. They were people who had intensity. And they were people who were willing to get involved. We need people like that. Church, I'm afraid there are a lot of things that need to happen in our world and our churches that need to happen, but they're not going to happen unless we get involved. We need people like Jason. We need people like Paul and Silas. We need people like these Greek women who were willing to go the distance for their faith, for the truth. And if it causes trouble, it causes trouble. There's nothing you can do about that. Because the message of the cross is disruptive. It's about a death, it's about a burial, it's about a resurrection. It causes strife. The whole concept of Christianity is about strife. It's about the body and the spirit. The war against the body and the spirit that goes on within our lives. It's trouble. We need people that are going to be involved. We have too many, what do we call them, armchair quarterbacks or backseat drivers telling everybody what we need to do when we need to be doing it. I want to close with an illustration that you've heard before. I'm sure you've heard before. But there was once a man who always seemed to, he just caught a boatload of fish. He'd bring a boatload of fish home. It was uncanny. He was always able to bring tons of fish home. His boat was just full of them. He went off fishing by himself. Another man heard his story about how this man was doing it, and he was the game warden. And he was questioning how this man was catching all this fish. So he decided to play the role of a friend and get involved with him and ask him if he could go fishing with him to see how he did it. The old fisherman said, "Sure, you're welcome to go with me." So they got in the boat and they set out in the water, and The game warden looked around and he noticed there was just a crate. There was just a crate there, but there was no fishing rods. There was no net. There was no tackle box with lures or anything like that. Just a crate. So he played along with the man, and as they went out to sea and they got ready to go fish, the man opened up the crate and he took a stick of dynamite and he lit the stick of dynamite and he threw it in the water. The big explosion and all the fish floated to the top. And he started going up, picking them up, gathering them in the boat. And the game warden said, "You can't do that. You know I'm going to have to turn you in. There's no way you can continue to do this. This is not the way to fish. This is not fishing. You're just picking up the fish and putting them in there. You're not supposed to do this." And the old man lit a stick of dynamite and handed it to the game warden and said, "Are you going to keep talking? Are you going to fish?" We know what needs to be done. And too many of us, we're talking about how we shouldn't and how we can't and how we won't and how we never will, when we need to start fishing. We need to just start fishing. And church, if it causes trouble, it causes trouble. There's nothing I can do about that. But I know that if I continue to be a man of integrity, if I seek to be a man of intensity, and if I'm a man that gets involved with my faith, I will live temporarily here, but I will have a mansion. Now that sounds bad. I don't care if it's a mansion. I don't care if it's a shack. If it's in heaven, it's in heaven. And that's where my home is. So you look at your life this morning and you see what maybe you can do. And maybe you haven't been this kind of person. Maybe you've been the opposite. And maybe you need some passion in your life. And maybe you need the forgiveness of sins. Maybe you need to start fresh. Maybe you need to come this morning. You just need prayer. But know that little tug in your heart this morning, that little tug that's telling you, you know you need to. You know you're supposed to.